Dr. Rana, welcome.
Hi, it's great.
I should start by saying congratulations for publishing this.
Well, thanks very much indeed. It's great to see a project which I've been working on for many years finally make its way into a book form.
How do you define what you call a new nationalism?
What I want to point out is something that I think is very obvious if you go to China, but for people who don't go to China may not be so visible. And that's that an event that happened a very long time ago, the Second World War, is actually really important for shaping the question of China's national identity in the present day. And that's something that's relatively new. I mean, as you know, historians often think in terms of decades rather than necessarily single years. So I'd say that really it's in the last 30 or 40 years, and particularly since the turn of the century in the 2000s, that World War II has become a more central factor in the way that the Chinese people think about their own national identity. So that's why I call it a new nationalism. It's about the formation of Chinese identity, their thinking about themselves, and why, in many ways, they look back to that period of World War II to help them shape that identity. That's what the book's about.
And so what was the political, economic, and social situation in China before the Second World War that it was transformed completely?
The Second World War is perhaps the single most transformative effect in terms of changing the destiny of China in the mid-20th century. So before the Second World War itself in the 1920s and 30s, China had become a republic. The last emperor of China had been overthrown in the year 1911, but China was still not at peace. There was a lot of internal conflict, civil war, and a great deal of economic turmoil as well. And then in the 1930s, Japan invaded China. Essentially, from 1937, you get an all-out war between the two countries. And I've explored that war in an earlier book, Forgotten Ally, published in Europe as China's War with Japan, which is a history of China during the World War II years, which for China lasts from 1937 to 1945. But the question of why it's so transformative is something that really occupies Chinese people even today. So if we think about some of the things which makes China so distinctive in the world today, it's the combination of a highly authoritarian government at home together with the desire to have this much stronger global role. And I think World War II and the memory of World War II has helped the Chinese to actually think through those contradictions. They look back to those years, the 1930s and 40s, as one when China was invaded by an outside power, managed to fight back and ultimately become victorious alongside their allies, the Americans and the British, and that the recollection of that earlier time, when China had international allies and fought a just cause, is used by the Chinese government of today to make an argument that China ought to have a role in today's global present.
If we are to look now at the global politics and international relations today, do you foresee China becoming like a new colonizer in the global south?
I don't think colonization is the right analogy to use about China's growing global role. Instead, the way that I would think about it is being what I call concentric circles. What I mean by that is that China exercises power in its own backyard in the Asia-Pacific region in a way that seeks to be the most powerful actor in the region. But the further you get away from China, the more its goals become a little hazier to find. They have more to do with economic influence than necessarily direct political power. So if you think about parts of the Asia-Pacific region, then China, I think, in some cases, would like to have much more direct control. You could think about an area like the South China Sea. But what about where China would like to have essentially complete ownership of that stretch of water? And other countries such as the Philippines, Vietnam, have pushed back very strongly against that. But that's not the case in Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America. There, I think the story is different. There, it's much more about creating a kind of economic interaction, which would lead to what you might call a path dependency. Let me give you a quick example to tell you what I mean. If you think about the next generation of internet connectivity, it will be dependent on 5G, the latest version of the high-level connections that come with the right sort of technology. And China is currently in a position to supply much of that 5G technology at a very low-cost rate to many countries in places like Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America. Now, they would argue that that's business, not colonization. Countries are free to take an American version if they prefer. But of course, what happens with China, particularly with a subsidized, cheaper 5G provision, is that after that, countries will then be more inclined to actually go back to have the repairs done by China, to build on the existing Chinese equipment with new 6G and 7G technology. So once you get people started on American or Chinese equipment, they will tend to often stick with the same suppliers. And it's that sort of economic dominance in places like sub-Saharan Africa, not, I think, a model necessarily of classic colonization, that describes much better what I think China is seeking to do with its economic strategy.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rana. Have a good day.
Thanks very much indeed. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful.